Okay, so today we are going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books of the season. Kayla from Books and Lala did this, and I know other creators do it, but she was the one that I saw and thought, hey, I'm gonna do that too. So she's linked in the description. So I do my monthly wrap-ups where I talk about everything that I read each month, but now we're gonna look at the last 3 months, the first 3 months of 2020, and see what were my favorites. And I had a lot. I had a lot of books I loved. So it was gonna be a top 5 book, but now it's a top 10, probably. I didn't count, but 10 feels right. So not necessarily going in order, but probably pretty close to order of how I read them. The first book that I'm going to be talking about, one of my new favorite books, is My Dark Vanessa. This book is only recently released, but I had an ARC, so I was able to read it at the very beginning of the year, and it was incredible. This book deals with then and now. So we watch Vanessa when she's 15 years old, went away to a boarding school and got swept up in this love affair with her professor. It's all very romantic until it's really, really not. We also get present day time and we see how messed up she is and how all of these things still affect her. I appreciate this book so much because it doesn't back down from how Vanessa felt, from how romantic she saw everything to be, but it in no way makes any of it look romantic to the reader. We get to see the subtle abusive behaviors and then the not so subtle abusive behaviors in her professor who's taking advantage of her. And then we also, Vanessa is self-aware enough that she recognizes that what's happening isn't right. She sees that her professor is telling her, you're in control here, but then he doesn't actually give her any control. She sees the inconsistencies, but she doesn't actually care because she's in love and she's happy with this situation. It's a really amazing story that is very, very, very hard to read. There are definitely difficult scenes to read in this book, so my Goodreads review does kind of go into that a little bit more if you want a little bit more information before you read it. But this book was so powerful, and I think that it couldn't have been executed better. It was the perfect balance of allowing us to really see from Vanessa's perspective and understand where she's coming from and why she's in this situation, while also the book is self-aware without crossing the line into just spoon-feeding readers. It was such a perfect balance. It was a hard read, but it's an important read, and it meant a lot to me. And man, it's a great book, and I highly recommend it. Next book on the list I don't have on my shelves right now because I lent it to my niece and haven't gotten it back yet. It's probably called The Boy, His Horse, the Mole, and the Fox, or something like that. This is a book that was sent, I think it was sent to Drennan from one of my subscribers. And Drennan, sometimes you guys send Drennan books and he just wants to sit down and read them right then. And so that's what we did. We sat down and we read that book right then. And it's a little bit longer than you would expect a children's book to be. It's definitely too old for Drennan, but he sat through the whole thing and I cried through parts of it. This is a book intended for children, but it is amazing for any age group. It's written in this lyrical sort of way, kind of like Winnie the Pooh. It reminded me a lot of the classic Winnie the Pooh books, and it has gorgeous illustrations throughout it, and it's such simple things said, conveying such deep emotions and thoughts. And it's a book that I wish I had read growing up because it's engaging enough for a kid, it's simple enough for a kid, but it helps process really complex emotions in a way that a child can really connect with, but also in a way that I, as a 27-year-old, really connected with. And it's one of my new all-time favorite books. It was amazing. It was incredibly layered. I recommend it to absolutely everybody, and I have bought copies for many of my family members because it was unbelievable. Next book on this list is Rage of Dragons. This is a book that I believe was published in 2019. I believe the sequel is coming out in the early 2021. Don't quote me. This is a debut novel for an indie author. He was originally self-published and now he is being traditionally published with the same book. This is about a man named Tao. He comes from this country, this group of people who are under attack and have been under attack for hundreds of years. This is a fantasy and the magic system in place in this book is really, really interesting, but definitely the story is a bigger focus than the magic, so I'll talk about that. Tao is, due to a set of circumstances, he is trying to rise in the ranks of his military so that he can get to certain people to satisfy his revenge lust on them. It is a military fantasy, so there are a lot of scenes of battle and training, and that's most of the book. There's also a really sweet romance, and there's a lot of Tao is driven by revenge. So all of his motivations are on that. He makes decisions based on that. If these things sound good to you, military fantasy with a revenge plot, then you should definitely pick this up. Even if that doesn't sound that interesting, unless it's a huge turnoff, you should pick it up because the execution of this book was so good. I loved the magic in this world. I loved the social dynamics that were in place. I found them really, really interesting. Even though revenge plot isn't something that interests me at all, Tao was still an interesting enough character that he pulled me through a device that I don't tend to care about. And the sword brothers, the friendships that are born in this book. Oh, I'm a sucker for those strong friendships, and I loved the friendships in this book. In fact, I bought a new computer shortly after reading this book, and I named my computer Udwak because it deserves that name. Udwak deserves to have something named after him. Maybe not a computer, but it's what I had. Next book on my list is a nonfiction, and it's called She Came to Slay. This is a nonfiction about Harriet Tubman. We start with her as a very young, I believe we start with her at 6 years old. Her life growing up, and then her many, many, many accomplishments throughout her life and sacrifices and who she was and who she chose to be. I loved this. Well, there's a lot of illustrations in it. I should show you that as well. We get a lot of pictures to illustrate what's happening, and there's also maps in this, so we actually get to follow Harriet on the Underground Railroad. And Harriet Tubman was my favorite historical figure to study in school, so I love any opportunity to learn more about her. But I especially loved this one because it not only focused on her many, many incredible acts and not just the Underground Railroad, but being a spy in a war and the relational sacrifices that she made. She was a phenomenal woman, but it also focuses on a lot of her personal sacrifices and the ways that she would take a hit socially and take a hit in situations where she wanted to stand up for herself, but she chose not to be able to not draw focus to her so that she can continue doing greater things behind the scenes. She was just an unbelievable woman, and I loved reading more about her, and I have more Harriet Tubman books saved on my Amazon list for when I'm gonna buy more nonfiction, because I just don't think I'll ever get tired of reading about this woman. Next book on my list is, I don't think I can call it a book, it's a pamphlet. I don't know what to call it. It's called The Yellow Wallpaper. This is about the shortest thing in the world, and let me tell you how many pages it is. 15 pages. You've got 15 pages of content in here. And I went into it knowing nothing. I will not tell you much because it's 15 pages of content. What I will tell you is that it is about a woman who has recently suffered an emotional trauma, and she is being treated through, she's being treated through self-isolation, but different from ours. She's being treated by being stuck in a room and having minimal contact, and she's not allowed to interact with other people. She's not allowed to write or have any sort of creative outlet. She's not allowed to do anything really except just stare at the yellow wallpaper in the room, and we watch her descent. The way I read this book was going in, knowing nothing, which, I mean, you can know things about it going into it, and just letting the story wash over me. And it was interesting. And then the end was, oh, it hit me hard. It was incredible. And then I did my research and learned that this is something that a woman wrote after she went through an emotional trauma and then was prescribed, I guess, to do this exact thing, just be stuck in a room, no creative outlet, no human interaction. That was worse for her than anything that could be. And she wrote this book to illustrate that this treatment that was common in her time is more harmful than anything else. And this little bitty story ended up impacting a lot of medical professionals in not using this treatment any longer. So it's an incredible story as a story. It's an amazing story in real life for how she was able to impact the medical field at this point, and how she was able to impact people who now don't have to be treated this way. And then it's an incredible story when you have that background as well. I just love it. So I physically read it the first time. Then I went ahead and listened to the audiobook because it's less than an hour long and it's free on YouTube because it's public domain. And it's just amazing, and it's worth your time. Next book on my list is The Girl with Seven Names. So this is another nonfiction, and I read this one really recently, so these are definitely not in a good order. This is a woman's true story about when she escaped North Korea. The first third of the book is her growing up in North Korea and what she believed and what she experienced, and her moments of realizing that what she's being told and what she's witnessing aren't the same thing. And then her journey escaping North Korea into China and then getting to South Korea and everywhere else that she went. And it was a really, really, really difficult journey, and she went through so much in her life. And it was just such a powerful story. I have so much respect for this woman and everything that she went through. And while there were things in this book that were so hard to read, it was amazing, and I'm really grateful that I got to read it, and grateful to the subscriber that sent it to me. Next book on my list is Wheel of Time, book 12. So I realized right after filming this that I can't put book 12 on this list because I just finished it. So let's pretend that this is book 11, because I did finish this one this last 3 months, and it was amazing. Book 11 was fantastic. It's the 11th book in a series, so there's not much to say about it. Just know that this book was amazing and I loved it. If I'm not very much mistaken, I believe I read the second 2 books in the First Law trilogy in 2020. I definitely read the first book in 2019. This is a grim, dark fantasy that is incredible. There's hardly any plot to it whatsoever, so don't go in expecting some amazing story to follow. Expect a really interesting world and some of the best built characters you'll ever see. This is a very dark world with very dark people, filled with people who make terrible decisions because they don't feel like they have a choice. And despite how awful they are, you can't stop following them and rooting for them sometimes. It's unbelievable. Honestly, Joe Abercrombie, or however you say that guy's name, his writing style, his ability is unbelievable. I have not read any of the standalones yet, but I'm going to go into them really soon because I loved this trilogy. It was a weird reading experience because I usually like books that have a decent amount of plot and character work. I don't really like books that focus on one or the other. But this trilogy felt very intentional. It seemed like the author wasn't lacking in plot. It's that he chose to focus on character work entirely. There is plot here. It's just not the point. Next book on my list is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So this is about 10 people who are, for different reasons, coerced onto this island and stuck there. And once they get there, they listen to a recording that tells them, you're all bad people and you deserve to die. And then they also get this nursery rhyme about these 10 soldier boys that are being picked off one by one. And then people start dying according to the nursery rhyme being picked off in similar ways. And the way it's written is so smart. What could be a potentially fine story had me on the edge of my seat and constantly excited to hear the next thing, because it was wrapped around this nursery rhyme and there were props along with it. There were these glass soldier boys that were disappearing as the people were it was so smart. It was so suspenseful. I loved reading every second of it, and I will be reading more Agatha Christie. People have warned me that this is probably her best book, so maybe not the best place to start, but oh well, I'm gonna read more of her books because this one was so good. And the last book on my list is Things My Son Needs to Know About the World. This is another nonfiction. This is by Frederick Bachman, who is my favorite author of all time. This is a collection of letters that he's written to his son. And Bachman's writing style is really unique to where he will start saying something and you have no idea where he's going. And then he'll keep saying it and rambling, and you're like, what are you doing, man? And then he'll finish saying it, and then all of a sudden you realize that all those rambles were really intentional, and it all comes together in this gut-punching, makes you want to die, but in the best way, and also makes you need to cry. He has a way to take these simple ideas and word them exactly how you need to hear them. And makes you think and makes you feel heard and understood, and Bachman just can write like no one else in the world can. And this is a collection of letters that all do that thing. They're all this rambly mess that tie together into this perfect masterpiece. I have underlined and written all over this book, and I read parts of it to Corey. I have cried over these pages. It was amazing. It was such a good experience. I will be reading it many times more. And I do highly recommend it. Bachman can't let me down. Okay, so those are some of my top books. No, these are my top books of the first 3 months in 2020. No! Oh, you know what I just realized
Here's some information for best books of 2020 so far.
Oh, tell me.
Here's a summary from Thrillist. The best books of 2020.
That's enough. No, thank you. Just realized that I just finished this, which means that it definitely doesn't fit into this list. So, whoops. So these are some of my top books from the first 3 months of 2020. Tell me what your top books are. Let me know if you plan to read any of these or if you have already read them and want to chat with me more about them in the comments. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.